Hello and welcome. My name is Vikram Chandra and you're watching This World, a show where we bring you a wrap of the week's biggest stories from around the planet. Our top story this week is from France, which has been on the boil all of the last 7 days. There have been deaths, arrests, politically charged statements, violence and personal attacks, including ramming a burning car into a mayor's home. How did it all start and where is it headed? We're going to be talking about this more on the show tonight. Also coming up, cocaine is found in the West Wing of the White House. Who sneaked in the drug? And is the discovery a commentary on America's drug problem? And here's another question that we're going to look at. Is cricket no longer a gentleman's game, and should it not be considered a gentleman's game? The dismissal of an England batsman by an Australian bowler has led to an unprecedented cricketing controversy. So much so that the prime ministers of the two countries are now taking potshots at each other. We bring you that story as well in a few minutes. But let's go straight to our top story. This is what France looked like all of this week. As you can see, cars were torched, shops looted, public buildings attacked, women and children were attacked too. 2019 was the last time France saw something similar. What happened in 2019 were the Yellow Vest protests. So what has triggered the fresh spate of violence 4 years on? The story began last week on the 27th of June, to be more specific. On that day, a police officer shot a teenager named Nahel. The teenager was driving through Paris. He was pulled over at a traffic stop. Two officers stood on either side of the car and began questioning him. The next thing you know, Nahel's car lurches forward and he is shot dead. Nahel was all of 17. He was of Algerian and Moroccan descent, and following his death, his mother called for a peaceful march. Little did she know that thousands would show up on the streets of Paris and suburban areas in solidarity with the family. Some were protesting police brutality, some were chanting anti-racism slogans, and some were highlighting how systemic racism runs deep in France. In the days that followed, a handful of protesters turned rioters, and then things escalated quickly. Before anyone realized, countries like China were discouraging their citizens from traveling around France.
A Chinese tour group was affected by riots during the tour in Marseille. The window of the bus they were traveling in was smashed, and several people sustained minor injuries. We once again remind Chinese citizens in France to pay close attention to the local security situation, go out cautiously, stay away from demonstrations and violent conflict areas, and strengthen security precautions.
The houses of two mayors were attacked over the week. On Sunday morning, the house of a mayor was attacked when rioters rammed a burning car into his house. The mayor was at the town hall at the time, but his wife and two children, aged 5 and 7, were at home. They fled, but his wife broke her knee while running for her life. In La Riche, rioters entered the garden of the mayor and tried to torch his car. As we speak, more than 45,000 police officers have been deployed across France. The country was burning all week. Eventually, Nahel's grandmother appealed for peace. Stop rioting, stop destroying, she said, highlighting how the movement has been hijacked by people with vested interests.
Je veux aux policiers qui a tué mon petit-fils. C'est tout ce que je veux. Les policiers, ils sont là, heureusement qu'ils sont là. Et les gens qui sont en train de casser, je leur ai dit arrêtez.
Earlier this week, the French President Emmanuel Macron met 300 local leaders. He discussed the possibility of banning access to certain social media features. The government said that protesters are using platforms like Snapchat, TikTok and Telegram to film and spread violence. And that, of course, led to its own controversy. Some people started to ask that the problem, is it really social media or is it systematic racism? And there are no clear, easy answers here. There's no denying that protesters and rioters have taken things a bit too far, in fact, certainly too far. You can't be attacking mayors. You can't be ramming burning cars into their homes. But the government and the authorities are also not absolutely blameless. There has been racism. There has been unnecessary police brutality. And matters look set to continue to escalate. And for more on this, we're now being joined by Anne-Elizabeth Moutet, who's a journalist and columnist for the London Telegraph, based there in France right now. Anne-Elizabeth, let me just start by asking you, what do you make of the way the situation is, the violence is? Where do you see this headed? Is there going to be a solution in the near future?
I think there could be solutions. I am not sure that this government, Emmanuel Macron's government, is capable of implementing those solutions, because the first things that have been said sound like what happened before in other instances. And the anger in the country is that there's no firmness and no understanding at the same time. We do not have presidential elections again until 2027. So it's either they suddenly become imaginative or the situation is not terribly good.
But of course, tricky questions of who exactly is it to blame in this? Is it people using social media to incite violence? Is it the rioters who've clearly gone way too far? Is it the authorities and the police who often use brutality in the past?
I would say it's like most situations, it is very complex. The French police is not, we have two separate police forces in France. We've got the police and we've got the gendarmerie. The gendarmerie works in the countryside and in small towns. They are a military force. They from their ranks come the elite troops that have been called by foreign governments to help them. And in general, you don't have problems with the gendarmes because they are both respectful and well-trained. The police in the cities in France has increasingly been neglected, like other professions, actually, like teachers, etc. And they are badly trained, badly paid, under attack, and with a feeling that they too are being neglected. And the result is that I wouldn't say that it's statistically, systematically racist, because you've got lots of people of color in the French police. You've got Arabs in the French police and children of Arab extraction. You've got black people in the French police from the West Indies. You always have. And that isn't a problem. But it's more and more the French police has been brutal because it felt cornered, because there weren't enough people. And it's so difficult now to recruit in the police. You have to realize that the French police has got the higher rate of suicides of all French professions. It's because it's a terrible job. You don't get enough support. You then don't get enough training. They need new policemen because lots of people resign. So the training was 1 year and it's gone down to 8 months. And then when you get in difficult neighborhoods, you get attacked with live fire, with mortar fire. And it's not just the police. It's, people will say, oh, but the police is racist. But the firemen put out fires. I mean, they're not racist. It's on fire. They will put it out. And the people who come from first aid, emergency rescue, they also are being shot at and pelted with stuff. I mean, there are instances of very young people throwing away their parents' washing machine on the police in some of the projects. So all of this has made for an explosive situation, and it needed a spark. And the spark was the killing of this young man, Nahel.
All right, Anne-Elizabeth Moutet, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Our next story is from the United States. Earlier this week, reports revealed that cocaine was found inside the White House. Not just inside the White House, but in its West Wing, the area where the president works. The West Wing has the Oval Office, the Situation Room, and other important offices. It is the center of American power. How did someone manage to get cocaine into the West Wing? And who is that someone? Reports say that the white powder was found in a storage space that is used by White House staff and by guests to mostly store their phones. Somebody put cocaine there. Who found the white powder? The Secret Service did during a routine check. Panic followed. The White House was evacuated and closed down. Now, why would somebody panic at the sight of cocaine? Because for quite some time, no one knew what the white powder really was. Was it a chemical weapon? Was it anthrax? Was it a nerve agent? Or was it something even more deadly? Now that question has been answered. None of those things, it was cocaine. But here's one question that has not been answered. Who sneaked cocaine into the White House? Think about it. We are talking about one of, if not the most heavily guarded place in the United States, the West Wing of the White House. Now, the White House has made it a point to tell the media that the US President Joe Biden was not in the White House during the incident.
Can you give any more details on where the Secret Service found cocaine in the West Wing and how it got there?
As you know, the President and the First Lady and their family were not here this weekend, as you all reported on this, and as you also know that they left on Friday and returned just yesterday.
And that wording is important because it's not only President Joe Biden, but also the First Lady and the President's son, Hunter Biden, who, of course, has a well-documented history with cocaine and which promptly became a major media furor in the United States, with a lot of people referring to that particular history. But the White House clearly is coming out with its own statements and is banking on that plausible deniability. But clearly, the entire story, the entire episode, is also a running commentary on America's ongoing drug problem, on the growing addiction and desperation that is forcing people to risk multi-layer security and get drugs into places like the White House. Now, some would say that the state also bears some of the responsibility for what is happening, and there's been a lot of debate about some of the changes that have been made to drug law in the past few years. In the last few years, for example, several American states have legalized recreation marijuana. From New York and California to Illinois and DC, anyone who's 21 years old or older can now buy marijuana. In some cities like New York, marijuana can be consumed in public places where smoking is allowed. DC permits pot in personal spaces. Now, we understand that cocaine isn't marijuana, and there's been a lot of debate and lots of statistics to show that legalizing marijuana or liberalizing the use of marijuana may not, and some would argue, should not have any impact on the consumption of hard drugs such as cocaine. But all of this clearly highlights America's drug problem, which doesn't look as if it's going away anywhere soon. Let me read out what the US National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, or NCDAS, says. 19.4% of Americans have used illegal substances at least once. Out of the 280 million aged 12 or older, 31.9 million are drug users. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, opioids are the primary driver of the spike in drug-related deaths. Between April 2020 and April 2021, 75,000 Americans died from opium overdose or other related substances to opium. The other numbers too are from 2021. Rest assured, the situation has only become worse during the pandemic. But to what end? More and more states are now legalizing recreation marijuana. Some are citing the economy and the need for cannabis revenue. Then you have New York citing equity. While legalizing recreation marijuana, the state said it would reinvest millions of dollars of tax revenues from cannabis in minority communities that have been ravaged by the war on drugs. Where has all of this led America? Let me put this question to Robert G Condits, who's a commentator and a recovery advocate who's been addressing the fentanyl epidemic by yearly utilizing the media and other forums for public policy. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Let me actually begin by first getting your take on the white powder that was found in the White House. What's your reaction to this particular report?
I think it's embarrassing, to be quite frank with you. I would liken it to going through security at an airport, where you're already in the airport and then you put your bags through the scanner and they discover, let's say, drugs. And so the question has to be, so they found it at an entry point, the West Wing entry point of the White House, where, let's say, visitors will store their belongings before they go in. And so I think the embarrassing part is, why are they allowed to get so close to the White House with those drugs. I think it's embarrassing, but I don't think it's anything more than someone bringing recreational drugs with them.
So let me now turn to that broader question of where the US is on the war on drugs. I mean, look, it used to be cocaine, it used to be heroin, it used to be poppy derivatives. There's a lot of discussion over marijuana. Now, of course, the focus seems to be fentanyl, which is where you have done a lot of your work. How do you see the war of drugs progressing? Is the US anywhere closer to winning it?
No, I don't think we are closer to winning it. I have an opinion. I live and breathe the fentanyl epidemic every day. I'm in recovery from substance use disorder. My daughter is. In fact, today she's celebrating 5 years of sobriety, and she's doing fantastic. But she had an issue with her drugs, 5.5 years ago. The simple question we have to ask is, why does it keep getting worse? Like, there seems to be missing pieces that the public don't know. I don't think China is doing anything more. And again, I don't have top secret clearance, but this is what makes sense to me. China is doing nothing more than providing the precursor chemicals to the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels. We know that. The PRC, the Chinese government, knows exactly which chemical companies are doing that. They know, and they're giving them their blessing. That's the culpability outside of money laundering money back into China. That's their culpability, I believe. I believe the source are the Mexican drug cartels, but not in the sense that they're just smuggling drugs in. My sources tell me that they have, military grade equipment. There are other podcasts, Ed Calderon, Lex Fridman. If you look at the podcast on YouTube, you'll see that they freely say that the cartels, which are likened to billion-dollar transnational corporations, have this tremendous wealth and power, and which extends around the world. So the question so my point is, in this political and military climate, I actually don't think it's a solvable problem right now.
So the question of the war on drugs is not something that's been hidden in the shadows anymore. I mean, every single person by now has probably been watching Narcos and aware of the Sinaloa cartel, aware of what's been happening in Medellin. They're aware of the war on drugs. Makes it even more perplexing because decades later, this is nothing new. It's been something which has been going on for 30 years or 40 years. No solution is being found. Or is no solution being found because there's just too much money involved?
Right. If you look back, there have been instances where the Bureau of Alcohol, and this is fact, there have been programs on the BBC about this. The United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms actually allowed the sales of weapons to one of the cartels so that they could wipe out the other cartels. This is a fact. So don't think that there's no corruption that's going on within our government.
All right, Robert, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Our final story this week is about cricket. Remember, it was once called a gentleman's game, because ideally the game has no room for sledging, cheating, temper tantrums, etc. But this, of course, utopia ended a long, long time back. And earlier this week, we were given a harsh reminder when a game of cricket seems to have almost resulted in a diplomatic tiff between two countries. I'm talking, of course, about Australia and England, the two countries currently playing their Test cricket series called the Ashes, the series that originated way back in the 1880s. During one of the Test matches earlier this week, things went south. English batsman Johnny Bairstow was stumped by Australian wicketkeeper Alex Carey. Bairstow essentially ducked a bouncer and then, thinking the over was over, he wandered out of the crease. He thought the over had ended, but it hadn't. And Carey hit the stumps. Bairstow was declared out. The moment seemed to become a turning point in the match, of course, but also became quite a diplomatic row. Australia went on to win the test and take a 2-0 series lead. But the manner of Bairstow's dismissal became the talk of the town. Was it fair? Was it against the spirit of cricket? You see, England and Australia are clearly not cricketing best friends, and Bairstow's dismissal fueled the flames between the two countries in the middle of the Ashes. English fans were furious. Before you knew it, the debate took a political turn. A spokesperson for the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said, and I quote, "The Prime Minister agrees with England captain Ben Stokes, who said the dismissal was against the spirit of cricket." The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese responded with a tweet of his own. He said, "I'm proud of our men's and women's cricket teams who have both won their opening two Ashes matches against England. Same old Aussies, always winning." How often do we see two heads of state, two heads of government getting involved in a sporting argument? Well, not quite gentlemanly, is it? So what was it about this particular game and this incident that got matters so much out of control? Joining me now to discuss this, Jack Hope from the Cricket Podcast Live, joining me now from London. Jack, so it seems to have become, well, quite a row, didn't it? I mean, of course, it's clear that Bairstow was out because the ball wasn't dead. So he was out. Carey did throw that ball before he knew he was going to wander out in quite that fashion. Against the spirit of the game, you think?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? And I think it divides along the lines of, you know, whether you think the spirit of cricket should be part of the rules or not. For me personally, I would have retracted the appeal, but I understand and I respect Pat Cummins' decision not to. He felt that it was fair. He said it afterwards, and he explained that Carey, the wicketkeeper, had seen Johnny Bairstow leaving his crease on multiple occasions through his innings and thought it would be a legitimate thing to do, to throw the ball at the stumps and appeal. So, look, there are two sides to the argument. There are good arguments for both. For me personally, I thought it was slightly against the spirit of cricket because I'm a romantic, and I think that still applies to the game.
This really seemed to have infuriated the British public quite a lot. I mean, the amount of column inches that were there in the British newspapers about this incident are probably more than they give to the Ashes in general. It was just like lots of it, Sunak getting involved. Why did it rile the British so much? Was it because it's the Ashes and the Australians, or something more to it?
Well, it's definitely in part. I think there are a few other factors going on as well. At the moment in the UK, there's not really a lot else happening from a sporting point of view. Wimbledon just kicked off on Monday. There's no Premier League. There's no England football internationals. So the Ashes is the biggest show in town right now. And you say it was massive news. It wasn't just big news in sport. It was on the front page of 6 or 7 of our biggest newspapers: The Sun, The Telegraph, The Guardian, The Times, The Metro, with quite inflammatory headlines. Same old Aussies, spirit of cricket reduced to ashes, shameless stumping storm, same old Aussies, a bare-faced sneak, giving you a flavour of that reaction. It was very, very hostile and was genuinely the biggest news in town on Monday.
Jack, thank you so much for joining us from London, and let's hope that things quieten down for the rest of the Ashes. The focus is more on the game rather than the things around it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Yeah, the cricket's been great. Let's get back to that.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us. All right, and that's all we have for you this week. We will see you again next week with a fresh lineup. My name is Vikram Chandra. You're watching This World on WION World is One.